Imagine this: an economist who says the government should be completely abolished. Not less government, not a limited government, no government at all. Murray Rothbard went even further. For him, a tax collector is morally no different from a highwayman, except that the government pretends you've consented. The Federal Reserve? Not a flaw in the system. A criminal cartel that needs to be abolished. The New Deal? It didn't end the Great Depression. It prolonged it by a decade. For 40 years, Rothbard slaughtered more economic sacred cows than almost anyone else. For this, he was ignored, mocked, and marginalized. And today, the president of Argentina governs his country according to precisely these ideas. This is the incredible story of Murray Rothbard. Murray Newton Rothbard was born on March 2, 1926, in New York City, the Bronx, to be specific. His father, David Rothbard, was a chemist, a Jewish immigrant from a small Polish shtetl who had arrived in America with nothing and built a life through individual determination and relentless work. Murray grew up in a household that was, by his own description, politically isolated. His father was one of the few conservatives in a neighborhood that was largely left liberal or outright communist. Murray inherited that isolation. He was a brilliant student, attending the private Birch-Wathen School in Manhattan, then enrolling at Columbia University, where he majored in mathematics before switching to economics. At Columbia, he encountered the Foundation for Economic Education, the first libertarian think tank in American history. Through FEE, he discovered the work of libertarian journalists and anti-statist thinkers who opposed not just big government, but war, conscription, and American imperialism. Rothbard later recalled, "All this rapidly converted me from a free market economist to a pure libertarian." But the conversion was not yet complete. For that, he needed one more encounter with a professor named Ludwig von Mises. Rothbard later recalled, "All this rapidly converted me from a free market economist to a pure libertarian." But the conversion was not yet complete. In the spring of 1949, a colleague at the Foundation for Economic Education handed him a massive new book. Its author was a European economist who had barely escaped the Nazis and was now teaching at New York University. Ludwig von Mises. The book was called Human Action. Rothbard started reading and couldn't stop. By the time he finished, his entire intellectual world had been turned upside down. Soon after, he learned that Mises held a private weekly seminar at NYU's Wall Street campus, 100 Trinity Place. Rothbard showed up, and he kept showing up, week after week, for years. In that small room gathered some of the sharpest, most independent minds in America, thinkers who had rejected the Keynesian consensus that dominated universities and government-funded institutions. There, Rothbard absorbed Mises's revolutionary ideas: praxeology, the true nature of capital, the Austrian theory of the business cycle, and the impossibility of socialist economic calculation. But Rothbard didn't stop where Mises stopped. He pushed the logic further. If central planning fails because it destroys price signals, what exactly is taxation? Isn't it simply forced extraction? Resources taken from the productive private economy and handed to the unproductive state? And if the state cannot rationally plan the economy, what moral or economic justification does it have to exist at all? One evening, his friends challenged him directly. Why are you actually in favor of a state that provides a police force and courts? If people can voluntarily agree to that, why can't they just as easily come together to build steel mills, dams, or anything else? Rothbard went home and thought about it all night. The next morning, he had the answer. My God, they're right. After more than a decade of intense work, supported by the William Volcker Fund, Rothbard finally published his magnum opus in 1962, Man, Economy, and State. It was originally supposed to be a simple introductory textbook on Austrian economics. What he delivered was nearly 1,000 pages of pure intellectual dynamite. Rothbard rebuilt economic theory from the ground up, starting from Mises's fundamental axiom of human action and constructing a complete system: value theory, price formation, capital and interest, production, money, banking, and the business cycle. But he went one decisive step further than Mises. He applied the praxeological method not only to the market, but to the state itself. Rothbard's conclusion was uncompromising. Every single form of government intervention, tariffs, minimum wages, rent controls, licenses, taxation, is not merely inefficient. It is a coercive violation of voluntary exchange and individual property rights. Not just bad economics. Unjust. Where Mises opposed intervention because it produced bad results, Rothbard condemned it because it was morally wrong. A breach of natural law and the absolute right of every person to their own body and the fruits of their labor. Man, Economy, and State cemented Rothbard's place as the most radical and systematic thinker in the Austrian tradition. In libertarian circles, it became a foundational text. In mainstream academia, it was almost completely ignored. Rothbard didn't care. He had long stopped seeking approval from a profession he believed had been captured by the state. In 1963, Rothbard published what may be his most practically influential work, America's Great Depression. The mainstream consensus in 1963 held that the Great Depression was a failure of capitalism, a crisis of insufficient demand that only Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal government intervention had ultimately resolved. Rothbard systematically dismantled this narrative. Drawing on Austrian business cycle theory, he showed that the Depression was not caused by market failure. It was caused by the Federal Reserve's credit expansion throughout the 1920s, precisely the kind of artificial boom that Mises and Hayek had predicted would end in collapse. The Fed, created in 1913 with the explicit goal of stabilizing the American financial system, had done the opposite. It had inflated a credit bubble that made the crash of 1929 inevitable. And then, crucially, the Hoover and Roosevelt administrations had intervened so aggressively to prevent the necessary liquidation that what should have been a 2-year recession became a 12-year catastrophe. Smoot-Hawley, agricultural price supports, National Industrial Recovery Act, gold confiscation, wage controls that prevented labor markets from clearing. Each intervention, presented as a remedy, extended and deepened the Depression. Rothbard's conclusion was stark. The New Deal didn't end the Great Depression. It was the Great Depression. The government caused it. The government prolonged it. And the government took credit for surviving it. The book is still in print. It is more relevant with every passing decade. Throughout his career, Rothbard returned again and again to a single institution that he regarded as the most dangerous in American economic life, the Federal Reserve. In 1994, just 1 year before his death, he published The Case Against the Fed. It was his most accessible book, deliberately written for a general audience. The argument was not technical, it was moral. The Federal Reserve, Rothbard argued, was not a neutral institution managing the money supply for the public good. It was a cartel, organized by the largest banks in America at a secret meeting on Jekyll Island, Georgia in 1910, designed to protect those banks from the consequences of their own irresponsible lending, while socializing the costs onto the general public through inflation. He described inflation not as a natural economic phenomenon, but as a form of legalized counterfeiting. When the Fed expands the money supply, whether to fund government debt or to bail out banks, it transfers purchasing power from everyone who holds dollars to whoever receives the new money first. the banks, the government, the connected, the public pays, in reduced purchasing power, in higher prices, in the slow, invisible destruction of their savings. Rothbard called this the Cantillon effect, named after the 18th century Irish-French economist Richard Cantillon, who first described how newly created money benefits those who receive it first and harms those who receive it last, which is always ordinary working Americans. Rothbard spent his career in intellectual combat, not just with Keynesians and socialists, but with everyone who disagreed with him, including people on his own side. His split with the Cato Institute in the early 1980s was acrimonious. Cato wanted to engage with Washington policymakers to influence legislation from within the system. Rothbard refused. Compromise with the state was, to him, not strategy. It was surrender. His relationship with Ayn Rand was famously stormy. He initially admired Atlas Shrugged deeply, calling it in a 1957 letter the greatest novel ever written. But the two clashed fundamentally over the state. Rand was a minarchist. She believed in a minimal government confined to courts, police, and national defense. Rothbard believed even that was unjustifiable. Their personal relationship ended badly. Their intellectual disagreement never resolved. Rothbard also clashed with Milton Friedman, the other great free market economist of his generation. Friedman supported a negative income tax, a steady monetary rule, and various forms of market-based government programs. Rothbard regarded all of these as concessions that validated the premise of state intervention. To Rothbard, Friedman wasn't a defender of freedom. He was a more efficient manager of the same system. He said it without apology. It is simply not possible to be a good economist and a good man if you are in favor of using coercion against innocent people. Rothbard was not known for diplomatic understatement. In 1982, Llewellyn Rockwell Jr. founded the Ludwig von Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. With the blessing of Margaret von Mises, Rothbard became its founding academic vice president. Finally, he had a real institutional home, and he poured everything into it. He led seminars, mentored a new generation of scholars, and edited the Review of Austrian Economics, the first academic journal dedicated entirely to the Austrian school. Even in the computer age, he still hammered away on an old typewriter, often producing over 20 pages a day. He was deep into his 2-volume An Austrian Perspective on the History of Economic Thought when he died of heart failure on January 7, 1995, at the age of 68. Rothbard left behind more than 20 books in his lifetime, 11 more published after his death, and thousands of articles. His ideas only grew stronger. Ron Paul called him his most important intellectual influence. Hans Hermann Hoppe developed his anarcho-capitalism into a comprehensive system that still shapes radical libertarian thought today. And then came the biggest surprise. In Argentina, Javier Milei discovered Rothbard, ran for president waving a chainsaw, and won. In December 2023, he took power and began slashing government with revolutionary force, the first head of state in modern history to govern explicitly on Rothbardian principles. Rothbard would have had plenty of opinions about it. He always did. He once said without apology, "It is simply not possible to be a good economist and a good man if you are in favor of using coercion against innocent people." No honest portrait of Rothbard can ignore the serious criticisms against him. His anarcho-capitalist vision that private competing agencies could fully replace the state, including courts, police, and national defense, is seen by most economists, even many Austrians, as utopian. Critics ask, how do you prevent private defense firms from becoming warlords? How do competing courts resolve disputes? What stops the strongest private agency from simply turning into a new government? Rothbard had detailed answers. Whether they convince you depends on how deeply you believe voluntary markets can solve problems that states have monopolized for centuries. His revisionist histories of the World Wars and the Cold War, which framed them largely as results of American imperialism, are often criticized as selective and overly ideological. In his later years, his paleo strategy led him to form alliances with paleo-conservatives, including on immigration and cultural issues. Many libertarians saw this as a betrayal of his own principles of individual rights. These criticisms are legitimate. They don't erase his enormous contributions, but they also shouldn't be brushed aside. For 40 years, Murray Rothbard said things that no respectable economist was allowed to say. Taxes are theft. Central banks issue counterfeit money. The government itself is the problem. People ignored him. But time has proven him right. Since his death in 1995, the Fed's balance sheet has exploded from $400 billion to over $8.9 trillion. The national debt has increased eightfold. The dollar has lost massive value. The 2008 financial crisis unfolded exactly according to the Austrian business cycle theory. And the bailouts proved who the Fed is really protecting. It was no coincidence that Rothbard was right. He was right because his framework was sound. Next week, Roland Bader, the most outspoken German-speaking advocate of Mises, Hayek, and Rothbard. See you then.